For over 50 years, Burlington's legacy has been great deals on coats for all weather conditions. So before you're caught unprepared for the winter weather, head to Burlington for name brands, quality items, and surprising fits for every family member. Stock up on coats, sweaters, and accessories before the cold hits, so you can finally stop avoiding the elements and start living comfortably. Warm up at your nearest Burlington location less than 1 mile away. Burlington. Deals, brands, wow.
When you check out at the pharmacy, you see the journey from idea to medicine, thanks to our intellectual property system, or IP for short. IP safeguards inventions, like a new way to prevent seizures or lower cholesterol. And IP supports competition from other brands, then lower cost generics, which are 90% of prescriptions filled in the US. Innovation, competition, lower costs, thanks to IP. Learn more at phrma.org/IP-workswonders.
Hi, and welcome back to Amicus. This is Slate's podcast about the law and the Supreme Court and the connection between the law and democracy itself. I'm Dahlia Lithwick. I cover the courts for Slate. And for those of you who already have the bends from the 12 bombshell news revelations that drop seemingly every day, please remember that this is a whole lot. Keep yourself hydrated, and thank you so much for being on the roller coaster with us as we attempt to figure it all out. This week saw arguments at the Supreme Court in Scarametti. That is the case concerning Tennessee's ban on gender-affirming healthcare for trans minors. We previewed the case last week with Chase Strangio of the ACLU, who argued it this week at the High Court. You can hear me and Mark Joseph Stern break down what happened at arguments in our Amicus Plus bonus episode right after this one. Details on how to listen in to that conversation at the end of this show. But first, as we wait to learn whether the Trump cabinet nominations of truly Bush League characters like Pete Hegseth or Tulsi Gabbard are likely to be withdrawn, we need to stop for a beat and consider that last weekend's naming of Kash Patel to presumably be the FBI director is almost more shocking in its implications for the entire American justice system. Above and beyond the fact that Patel is kind of a grifter and definitely an unreconstructed yes man, his nomination serves as, I think, the surest sign that Trump's Justice Department will use its prosecution and investigation arms to go after enemies and settle scores. This is just classic tin pot dictator stuff, publishing your enemies lists, threatening to use government investigations and prosecutions to get vengeance on your critics. And while a whole lot of the other Trump nominees are wealthy hacks or Fox contributors, Kash Patel is actually an incredibly competent yes man. Joining me to talk about why Kash Patel's potential elevation to the directorship of the FBI should be taken extremely seriously as a harbinger of what comes next, my friend, Joyce Vance. Joyce is a distinguished professor of the practice of law at the University of Alabama School of Law. She served as the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Alabama from 2009 to 2017. Eric Holder tapped her to serve on his first Attorney General's Advisory Committee of U.S. Attorneys in October 2009. Joyce is also an MSNBC contributor, a member of the esteemed Sisters-in-Law podcast team, and a member of the Cafe Insider podcast team with fellow former U.S. Attorney Preet Bharara. And in June 2022, Joyce launched her absolutely invaluable civil discourse newsletter on Substack, which I really urge you to read every day, slightly for the chickens, but much more for this amazing ability that Joyce has to distill heat, light, forest trees. So Joyce, that was a very long intro. Welcome.
Yeah, that was too much.
Well, I don't know what to tell you. I think I work hard and then I'm exhausted just reading your bio. So it's a treat to have you here. And so I thought maybe we could just start by understanding what the FBI director does. And, Trump is threatening to sack the current FBI director, Christopher Wray. He still has 3 years left in his term. He's saying he wants to nominate Patel in his place. Can you just tell us why Congress decided in 1968 why there needs to be a 10-year term for FBI directors, and then just help me understand whether Trump really can just fire Christopher Wray and mash Patel into the slot?
Well, so I'll go backwards with your questions. I mean, yes, Trump absolutely can fire Chris Wray. That's how Chris Wray got the job in the first place. Trump fired his predecessor, Jim Comey, when Jim proved to be insufficiently loyal. And so Chris knew what he was getting into, I think, when he took the job, and has done a good, solid job as the FBI director, but understands that his time is coming. You know, it is a difficult construct to imagine Kash Patel as the director of the FBI doing that incredibly important job. The reason that the 10-year term exists is because everyone has always understood until Donald Trump came along that the Justice Department, which the FBI is a part of, it's one of the 4 law enforcement agencies at DOJ, it's a little bit different. Yes, the Attorney General works for the president, as does the director of the FBI, but we also give them some independence, because what we don't want is to have a criminal justice system that's a political tool. We don't want presidents to be able to prosecute their enemies and forgive their friends. And so there's this independence. I mean, it's sort of fascinating. The FBI director has always been a Republican. I guess the central casting view of an FBI director does not involve a Democrat or a woman, for that matter, at least up until now. But there's this sense that the independence that comes with a presumptive 10-year term means that that FBI director will feel like he or she can do the right thing, not the politically expedient thing. And so that's how we have always lived. There have been 2 instances where an FBI director has been removed. One was Bill Clinton removed his FBI director when evidence came to light that he had been mismanaging some of the financial resources of the Bureau. And then Trump and the firing of Jim Comey. Now it looks like we're on the way to a third.
Is there any sort of meaningful argument that, no, this is a serious thing, this 10-year term, and that should an issue like this go to the Supreme Court would take it seriously? Or do we just simply understand, as you say, it's been done before, we're at a kind of peak unitary executive moment with the Supreme Court anyway, where they're going to say, were this to come to them, like, hell, he can hire and fire whoever he wants. We've been seeing that really bubbling up in the doctrine in other cases. There's no reason to think there's any legal reason Trump couldn't fire him. And I guess the follow-on question is, does that mean that Chris Wray should just stay and fight it out?
You know, we live in an era where so much of what used to be fringe sort of legal argumentation, the way the unitary executive theory really was, until maybe I would sort of give Bill Barr credit for popularizing it when he wrote this sort of his audition memo to be Attorney General that was circulated inside of both the White House and the Justice Department, which seemed sort of inappropriate at the time. But this sort of notion of a powerful presidency that consolidates power is, I think, very much where we are and where the courts are. And look, I'm not in the business of giving people who are in difficult situations advice, because I think people have different tolerance levels for risk and different concerns about family and other issues right now. But I think Chris Wray is that person who should stay in office and force Trump to fire him and pay the freight for doing that, to the extent that there's any freight to be paid. I have different views about the folks at DOJ who are working on Jack Smith's task force. Their situation is different, but Chris Wray should just say, this is my job. I'm going to stick around until you fire me.
I think the reason I really wanted to hear your thoughts on Kash Patel, among the reasons, is that he's just a really kind of weird character. And he's very hard to get your head around. And chief among the weirdnesses, you noted this in your Substack about him this week, he was, at least according to the reporting in The Atlantic, we're going to talk about a little bit, a good lawyer. He did a good job. He was a decent public defender. He's a little bit of a grandstander, maybe didn't always do the work, but like, this was a sane lawyer for some time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the right place to start because folks who knew him and who worked with him said that he was a good public defender. He was both in the state system and in the federal system. He was hired into Main Justice during the Obama administration into the National Security Division, which, let me tell you, is a very, very serious job. I think he had some problems in the National Security Division, but I want to just start there with that background and say that is a laudable background of public service that anyone would be proud to have. It does not qualify you to be the director of the FBI. I mean, it doesn't really even qualify you to run a division within the National Security Division. You know, if I was running that division at DOJ, I would not have considered somebody with his background to be, say, a deputy chief of a section or something like that, just because he was so new to the Justice Department, so new to the practice, only had this very tight beam focus in national security. He is certainly not qualified to be the head of the FBI. And I don't say that sort of like in a cheesy, dismissive way. I just say, you know, I think about this. I sort of had a similar job. I was a line prosecutor at DOJ after spending 6 years in private practice. As a line prosecutor at DOJ, I would not have been qualified to run the FBI. So there's a certain amount of hubris there in being willing to accept that kind of a nomination.
So I think the next piece of this, and you've started moving us there, is, you know, that he moves over to DOJ. He is in the National Security Division for a while. My very first question is, did you run across him? Did you ever encounter him? Like up until the moment that he starts to be a player in Trumplandia, had you ever heard of him?
Yeah. So look, before I was the U.S. attorney in Birmingham, I was the appellate chief, and I hope I'm not going to burn all my former appellate chief friends by saying we are a chit-chatty, gossipy group by nature. And so at the point where Kash Patel ran into trouble in front of a district judge in Texas and got crossways with him, and that judge wrote just a really strident order lambasting him, that circulated pretty heavily among the appellate types in United States attorneys' offices, for the one thing, because we would always collect those sort of orders by judges to use as cautionary tales with our prosecutors, but because sometimes, so I'll air a little bit of dirty laundry here because it's just you and me. Sometimes the view in Main Justice as to how Main Justice lawyers are treated by judges and by U.S. attorneys' offices out in the field, it's a little bit different than the take that the U.S. attorneys' offices have of Main Justice lawyers coming down and litigating in their districts. And so this was a cantankerous judge who went out of his way to criticize Kash Patel, who had been on this long flight back from Central Asia, shows up without a tie, thinks he's getting a tie from somebody in the U.S. Attorney's Office, shows up for court in what is clearly inappropriate attire. I mean, probably should have gone into the judge's secretary first and explained and mea culpa'd, but for whatever reason didn't know that he needed to do that, and the judge just really takes umbrage at the way he's dressed. And usually judges, they don't jump right away. There's clearly a little bit of history here and a problem handling the situation in the courtroom. This should be a minor incident in a young lawyer's life, right? You live, you learn, your bosses support you, but you don't work in a Texas U.S. Attorney's Office. You work in the National Security Division. It's over, move on. It appears to have been difficult for him to move on, which is maybe the first sign that we get about his temperament and his ability to sort of manage a large enterprise.
Right. I mean, this is such a weird incident, and I'm not sure everybody knows about it, but this is literally like Tie-gate that goes down in a Texas courtroom in 2016. And as you said, definitely abused and humiliated by the judge, inappropriately so. And, his folks at the Justice Department were kind of on his side. They were like, you're right. That sucked.
Absolutely. He got strong support from his supervisors, right? Very strong support.
And the sort of, I think the linchpin of this is, to the extent that this is the superhero origin story of the Kash Patel we're going to have to reckon with now, is that I think he wanted what? Like, stop the presses, like the DOJ, like is all going to go on a hunger strike until this is remedied. And, later in his book, he says that both the DOJ and the media, quote, drag my name through the mud. And I just want to link up. I think you've implied this, but it's so interesting that it's this like kind of trivial personal slight that every young lawyer experiences that becomes the moment of reckoning that turns him into the Hulk.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of weird, right? Because it is trivial. The reality is this, and this is something that any lawyer who's halfway decent understands. You are never going to win a fight with the person in the black dress, right? The judge who's sitting up on that bench who makes the calls, if a judge gets crossways with you, all you can do is walk away and live to fight another day. And for Kash Patel, that was easy. It just meant never going back to this district. There was no reason he ever had to go back to that court again. And I'm not really sure what more he thought his leadership could have done for him, right? I mean, that is a United States attorney who is presidentially appointed and Senate confirmed. That's their district. If that U.S. attorney wants to go over to the judge and register displeasure, he or she can do that, but they don't have to. And so I think the fact that he harbored animosity just is a character defect.
I guess now's a good time to say that Joyce and I are both kind of referencing what I think is the definitive Kash Patel profile written last August in The Atlantic by Elena Plott-Calabro, who appears, by the way, on What Next this week. And really, I think, understands the ways in which some of these like shamings and humiliations and senses of institutional abandonment are the things that trigger Kash Patel into becoming, a weird deep stater election denier. But I also think there's another piece of this. We have Attorney General Bill Barr saying, like, I'm not going to have Patel be a deputy director of the FBI. He apparently told Trump's chief of staff, Mark Meadows, that he would allow Patel to have that role, quote, over my dead body. We have Gina Haspel at the CIA, who was going to resign when Trump wanted to put Patel up as the deputy director of the CIA. I mean, these were not people that were in conflict with Donald Trump or Trumpism. These were Trump people who were just like, this guy is nuts. And I think it's really worth understanding how many institutional actors along the line, like serious people whose politics you may not agree with, but like who were qualified serious people, were just like, no, this guy's a lightweight.
Yeah, I mean, we don't really know what their reasoning was, but I think her reporting is fascinating. And I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that if both the Attorney General and the head of the CIA think that you shouldn't be in one of these major roles, then that's a real red flag that any president should consider before nominating that person. But Donald Trump did not do that here. And, it's so interesting. You think about these sort of just basic precepts of ethics that go along with having a job like that. Is Kash Patel going to continue selling his books and shoes and whatever the heck else, he's selling right now? Because that would be a conflict of interest, right? People currying favor with an FBI director by buying his stuff. So is he willing to drop all of that? And of course, the background, sort of the vetting issues, the security clearance issues would branch out from there. He has presumptively had a security clearance at other points in his life, having been both in the National Security Division and served in Donald Trump's first administration. But now that Trump has signed off on the transition agreement with the Justice Department, which means he has access to background clearances from inside of the department, it would be very interesting and instructive to see if Kash Patel could pass that test.
More in a moment with Joyce White Vance.
Planned Parenthood Federation of America exists so that all people can get access to the sexual and reproductive care and education they need to make informed decisions about their health. More than 2 million patients a year rely on the services Planned Parenthood health centers provide, like STI testing and treatment, birth control, gender-affirming care, abortion, cancer screenings, and so much more. Right now, all across the country, reproductive health care and rights are under attack from public officials who are out of step with the will of the vast majority of Americans. The constitutional right to abortion, control of our bodies, and the health care we need has been stolen from us. And now politicians in 47 states, yes, 47, have introduced bills that would block people from getting the sexual and reproductive care they need. Planned Parenthood knows that equitable access to health care, including safe, legal abortion, is a human right. Right now, Planned Parenthood needs your help to protect access to health care. Donate today by visiting plannedparenthood.org/protect.
This episode is brought to you by NetSuite. What does the future hold for business? Ask 9 experts and you'll get 10 answers. Bull market, bear market, rates will rise or fall. Can someone please invent a crystal ball? Until then, over 40,000 businesses have future-proofed their business with NetSuite by Oracle, the #1 cloud ERP, bringing accounting, financial management, inventory, HR into one fluid platform. With one unified business management suite, there's one source of truth giving you the visibility and control you need to make quick decisions. With real-time insights and forecasting, you're peering into the future with actionable data. When you're closing the books, in days, not weeks, you're spending less time looking backwards and more time on what's next. Whether your company is earning millions or even hundreds of millions, NetSuite helps you respond to immediate challenges and seize your biggest opportunities. Speaking of opportunity, download the CFO's Guide to AI and Machine Learning at netsuite.com/amicus. The guide is free to you at netsuite.com/amicus, netsuite.com/amicus. Let's return now to my conversation with Joyce White Vance. I would love you to take us down memory lane on 2 other points that I think maybe not everybody understands in terms of Kash Patel, lawyer. One of them is the Nunes memo back in 2018. And Patel becomes kind of, once he's disaffected with DOJ and is all in for Donald Trump, can you remind us what the Nunes memo was about and what it signaled that he was kind of the prime mover there?
You know, I think the takeaway is that this was the start of Donald Trump's Russia, right? The deep state was out to get me. These investigations into Russian interference in the 2016 election were ineffectual. And where this really got traction was with this notion that the FBI had exceeded the boundaries in parts of the investigation. And in fact, that turned out to be true. The FBI had done some things that violated policy. That I don't think taints the entire notion that Russia, whether with Trump's agreement or not, was interested in the outcome of the 2016 election in ways that did not serve our best interests as a sovereign country. But this becomes Kash Patel's platform. This becomes his opportunity to serve in a position closer to Donald Trump, where he can constantly try to get face time and show himself to be the sort of yes man you described in your opening.
And, the other pattern here is that as he's kind of beavering away, getting this memo together, he's getting crosswise again with GOP leadership that he believes from the deepest conviction they should be fighting his battles.
Right. And there's a Senate subcommittee report, bipartisan Republicans on the panel that just takes a different view. And Kash Patel can't understand, I think, what his role in the process is vis-a-vis these other people. And it's a fascinating case study in some ways that he lands where he does. I mean, maybe he does have a strong, forceful personality because he has certainly, you'll forgive me, trumped a lot of the people that he was in conflict with.
Right. And also, I think, lays down the road for what then becomes Trump's big defense. And we see that again. This is the other sort of piece of history I'd love for you to excavate for us. But, after 2020, he could have just sold scarves or whatever it was he was doing, but he somehow lands up in the middle of the classified documents investigation that the FBI is conducting at Mar-a-Lago up till and including testifying. And this actually becomes when he starts saying that like Donald Trump magically like waved a wand and like a unicorn appeared and then everything was declassified. That becomes Trump's defense.
I mean, this is history that's worth excavating. But first, since you raised the scarves, I do have to say, I have this real curiosity. I need to go online and look at the scarves he's selling. But he notes that they're intarsia scarves. And as a knitter, that speaks to me because it's like a very specific technique. It's very difficult. You don't usually think of machine knitting using it. So at some point, I've got to go check that out. It makes me wonder if maybe he knits on top of everything else. But what he did not do, although he came up with the defense that Donald Trump adopted, he did not come up with a credible defense because this is something that's been widely dismissed. And I think it's important to say that at the outset. As the classified documents investigation builds up a head of steam, Kash Patel is the one who comes out and says, before Donald Trump left the White House, he declassified any documents that are down at Mar-a-Lago. In fact, I was with him when he did it, magic wand, unicorns, whole 9 yards, no possible crime, because as the sitting president, he would have had the ability to declassify all of these documents, and he did. And what follows that is twofold. One part of it is Donald Trump picking that up and touting that as his defense. And the other part is every single individual who would have been in the line of fire had something like that actually happen, saying, didn't happen. There was no standing order like this. You can't just like wave the magic wand and go documents are declassified. That has to be memorialized and noted. It has implication across government when something is declassified. And there's simply nothing that reflects that Donald Trump engaged in these sort of magic declassifications.
And again, I think there's a theme here that's really worth pulling on, which is not just deep sense of grievance, not just abiding belief that every institution is corrupt, not just a sense of entitlement to have everybody believe what he says, but also this weird prescient ability to say, if I do Russia, 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 Donald Trump's really going to like that. And if I do the magic declassification wand, Donald Trump may really seize on that. And so there's a weird symbiosis here that I think is a fascinating legal phenomenon, which is you have a total, I don't know how to say this kindly, but kind of bootlicker, right? Like Trump will always win. Trump is always right. Who is actually fashioning Trumpian legal arguments that then Trump seizes upon. So there's kind of like, to the extent that Trump always wanted his Roy Cohn, right? He wanted the person who was his fixer. He's got a fixer who also really invents absolutely bonkers legal theories that then Trump adopts. It's a perfect loop.
So it's really interesting. I mean, this is not Matt Gaetz, right? Matt Gaetz would have just been simply incompetent as an attorney general. This is a practicing lawyer who does understand what the landscape looks like, who has backed the right horse, right? When a lot of people thought Donald Trump would never make it, Kash Patel stuck to his guns. It just wasn't, the horse that was labeled democracy on the side. It was the horse that had the other label. I don't want to speculate about other people's motives when I don't know them, but Kash Patel looks like someone who really wanted to have a sudden rise to power and thought that this was the best opportunity for him personally and went that way. That's what it looks like. It's very hard for me to square somebody who's spent time in the Justice Department and as a public defender with somebody who would sort of adopt a Trumpian worldview. So I guess it's a pickle. But the bottom line is Kash Patel is not stupid. And I think that's a very important takeaway. I mean, this is not someone that folks are saying shouldn't be the FBI director because maybe he couldn't learn the job or grow into the job, even though he really lacks the sort of qualifications that makes for a superb FBI director. This is someone who's sort of cagey like a fox. And the problem is his commitment to the wrong principles. At the end of the day, that's the real issue. I've never seen an FBI director, walk into the office with a laundry list to shake out of people on his revenge hit list. And that's frightening.
Yeah, I think our mutual friend Mark Elias keeps putting it this way. You've got a panoply of people who are either incompetent or simply hate the agency that they've been put in charge of. Kash Patel is neither of those things. He just wants to be J. Edgar Hoover. I mean, he just really wants to use the agency in the most pernicious ways to go after enemies. And that signals that this is a very serious project. This isn't just doing away with the Department of Education. This is using the Justice Department full-throated force of the law to go after enemies. And I think the other thing, and I just want to play you a little bit of audio, Elena Plott Calabro, who again did that Atlantic profile, telling Mary Harris this week on our sister podcast, What Next? Something that I think you had also put in your Substack, which is the really frightening thing, is that there isn't actually like a vision. There isn't a programmatic or policy. This is what I want the Justice Department to be. It's just, I want to do what Trump wants me to do. So let's listen to her.
To call somebody in Donald Trump's orbit a loyalist is not an incredibly exceptional label, but Kash Patel was exceptional in his devotion. And having covered Donald Trump and the people around him now for, I guess, close to a decade, he was the one person that I had encountered where it wasn't just sort of the obvious suspects who disliked him. It was also people who were very close to Donald Trump themselves. Donald Trump was the only person who actually seemed to trust and respect him.
So that also feels to me like there's this kind of Gates quality, right? Where even the Trump loyalists are like, I feel a little hanky about that guy, and it doesn't matter.
I think there's this other great quote, I'm pretty sure it's in her piece, correct me if I'm wrong, where Trump is asked about Patel and he says, yeah, he's a little bit crazy. People say he's crazy. I agree he's a little bit crazy, but we need a little bit of crazy. And, where we don't need crazy is in the director's office at the FBI. It's just.
So let's put meat on the bones here, because we've been fainting at this and not saying it explicitly. I thought one of the things that was striking in that same profile was that many of the nearly 40 of Patel's former Trump administration colleagues that cooperated with the piece would not give their names. They had to be anonymous because they were so terrified of retaliation. So I just want to really talk about what this means. Retaliation, retribution, enemies lists. We're going to go after people. We're going after journalists. This is J. Edgar Hoover on steroids. And I think that it's the thing that is very hard for people to imagine. And I think it's, you and I are sort of like freaking out about it. And I think it's hard to communicate how fundamentally, existentially dangerous that is.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like on steroids and on acid at the same time, right? Because what we rely on FBI directors to be is to be steady hands, to be cool heads in difficult times. The FBI has this incredibly difficult job of protecting the national security against terrorist attacks. And what that means is they're playing defense all the time. They can't let one, football go through the goalposts. That requires someone who is focused like 105% of the time on that part of their portfolio. even though they have really significant other parts of the portfolio, like violent crime, for one thing, or public corruption, which I expect will die in this next administration, civil rights, trafficking, drugs, cartels, you name it, it's in the FBI director's portfolio. But that keeping the American people safe from foreign terrorist attacks is really job number one. Would Kash Patel walk away from the revenge tour for long enough to take that job seriously? Maybe he would get in the chair and understand that that was the job and that every day started at 5 a.m. with a security briefing. But the potential for abuse of the position is just so ever present. An FBI director has special agents in charge across the country in offices. And traditionally, at least when I was in Main Justice, maybe it's done differently now, the FBI director would meet with them on Zoom like once a week, right? That's your boss. That's your ultimate boss. And the FBI works to set priorities. There are national priorities. There are priorities in every one of the areas of responsibility across the country that the FBI staffs, some of them overseas. And so the director really can look down at a special agent in charge, say in, take your pick, Des Moines, and say, listen, you really need to prosecute these 3 people. You need to go ahead and do that now. And that special agent in charge knows that future promotions in their career are contingent on making the director happy. Now, most directors exercise this power in a very robust way to make sure that the priorities that matter to the American people are the ones that are being effectuated. You might disagree about, should civil rights have a higher priority than it does or whatever, but that's the director's concern, is what makes the country safer and better off. The risk that you would have a director who would not have that as his North Star, I think, is utterly terrifying.
We are going to take a short break. There are at least a million reasons I love my cat. Chief among them is her little white fur bib, which looks so much like Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg's lace collar that my son named her Arby. One of the things I do not love about Arby, scooping the litter box. But I don't have to do that anymore thanks to Litter Robot by Whisker. Litter Robot's self-cleaning technology cleans after every use, so your cats will always have a fresh bed of litter. It is perfect for the cat lover in your life this giving season. As a special offer, Whisker is offering up to $100 off Litter Robot bundles, and as a special offer to listeners, you can get an additional $50 off when you go to stopscooping.com/amicus. This is Litter Robot's best offer ever. Up to $100 off Litter Robot bundles and an additional $50 off when you go to stopscooping.com/amicus, stopscooping.com/amicus. When creating your own business, the most important part is your ideas. Why let the headache of registering your business hold those ideas back? A great idea that can keep you going and growing? LegalZoom. For 20 years, LegalZoom has helped business owners take their first step and every step after, from reliable business formation to experienced guidance in legal and tax. Launch, run, and protect your business to make it official today at LegalZoom.com and use promo code SLATEPOD to get 10% off any LegalZoom business formation product, excluding subscriptions and renewals. Expires December 31st, 2024. Get everything you need from setup to success at LegalZoom.com and use promo code SLATEPOD. LegalZoom.com and use promo code SLATEPOD. LegalZoom provides access to independent attorneys and self-service tools. LegalZoom is not a law firm and does not provide legal advice except where authorized through its subsidiary law firm, LZ Legal Services, LLC.
This episode is brought to you by NRDC. We all know by now that Trump was elected president, and one thing is paramount. We must fight for our planet. The Natural Resources Defense Council, NRDC, is fighting in and out of court to protect the environment, public health, and climate progress from Trump's Project 2025 agenda. NRDC has done it before, and with your help, they'll do it again. During Trump's first term, NRDC filed over 150 lawsuits against Trump's administration and won almost 90% of resolved cases. And this time, they're ready to fight even harder. Despite Trump and his allies' best efforts to pull society backward again, NRDC will work every day to not let them stand in the way of progress. Your support is critical right now. NRDC is not giving up, and with you, they can safeguard our planet for future generations. Donate now at nrdc.org/podcast. All gifts matched for a limited time.
And we are back now with former U.S. Attorney Joyce Vance. There's two pieces of this I want to probe with you, and one is threats to journalists. And you are in a funny posture. You're sort of both a career DOJ person and a journalist. And I think a lot of journalists took very, very seriously when Kash Patel straight up told Steve Bannon, we will go out and find the conspirators, not just in government, but in the media. Yes, we're going to come after the people in the media who lied about American citizens, who helped Joe Biden rig presidential elections. We're going to come after you. And sure, you can call it the sort of typical Trumpian, put journalists in a cage, have people throw stuff at them at rallies, right? None of this is really new, going after journalists by name. This is the MO. At the same time, when you start saying you're going to go after the people who thought that Joe Biden actually won the 2020 election, that isn't just kind of frightening on its own terms. It also has this profound chilling effect. The thought that the FBI director, and you and I have both seen his enemies list, has in the crosshairs a whole bunch of people that you and I think of as serious journalists is really, really next level.
Look, I think we live in a moment where both for people in the media and people who are targets on one or more of the lists that are circulating, as well as average, everyday Americans, we need to adopt courage as our mantra, not fear, right? Courage is something that we can summon and have as groups. Olivia Troy had this moment of incredible courage this week where Kash Patel asked her, maybe more than asked, directed her to back down her criticisms of his fitness that she had made on television, sort of, or else. And she just said, look, I said what I said. I mean, I'm not going to back down. I think that it is incumbent upon everyone who's in the position to do so to show that sort of pro-democracy courage. And those of us who are not in, the firing lines, it's incumbent upon us to support those people. That is how we get through the next 4 years.
I would like to think about the other piece of this, which is the threats to the FBI itself, right? The threats to the Justice Department. Earlier this month, Patel had said, quote, I'd shut down the FBI Hoover building on day one. I'd reopen the next day as a museum of the deep state. I'd take the 7,000 employees that work in the building and send them across America to chase down criminals. And, as we've now both said, there's various kind of target lists circulating. It leads me right back to where you started, which is, what are the lawyers on these lists meant to do? And I know you're going to say courage, but I think some of these lawyers are really, really afraid for their families. They're really afraid for their savings. They're afraid for their careers. And I would love to have you think through, we've talked about this on the show a couple of times since the election. What is your responsibility? And we can be specific about Justice Department lawyers, or you mentioned Jack Smith's teams. This kind of A.O. Hirschman exit loyalty voice obsession I've had since 2016. What's the line between sticking around, toughing it out, being the person who's, at minimum saying no, at maximum, I guess at some point being Sally Yates? I guess I'm asking for your taxonomy of how particularly Justice Department lawyers should be thinking about their futures, their reputations, their complicity in something they may hate doing. Do you have a theory of the case?
I have some thoughts, right? The first thing is no lawyer who works at the Justice Department is well off unless they went into the job with family money. I mean, I made less money as a U.S. attorney than I made in private practice. So these are not folks who have the ability to take themselves and their families out of the country to protect and insulate their resources, to pay for expensive lawyers. And I think what at the first level this looks like, because look, nobody on Jack Smith's team has committed a crime, right? And so that doesn't really matter if you want to harass them. You can investigate. You can force them to come in for interviews. That means that they need to hire fairly expensive lawyers and show up. You can go through their taxes with a fine-tooth comb. There is a lot of stuff that you can do if you're committed to harassment. My hope would be that some of the people that it would take to conduct that harassment would stand up, would blow the whistle, would refuse to go along. You know, the men and women that I worked with at both DOJ and the FBI are sort of hardwired to do the right thing for the right reasons in the right way. I would hope that they would stand up. But it is asking an awful lot for line prosecutors and agents to shoulder the entire burden for preserving democracy when, for instance, the United States Senate cannot be bothered to do so. And this, frankly, is where I struggle. I mean, I think that where we should focus our efforts, and I know you're asking me a very different question, so feel free to redirect me. I think we should insist that Republicans in the Senate do their goddamn job and refuse to confirm people who, you know, if you are an election denier, you are unfit to take the oath of office. You cannot do so honestly. You should not be permitted to serve. That shouldn't be tough for anyone in the Senate to agree with. And if in fact their loyalty to the cult of Trump now is more important to them than Constitution and country, well, we're going to find that out pretty quickly. And at that point, that may be a signal to some of these folks that we hope would stand up for democracy, that maybe it is time to either keep their heads down or to cut and run, because you cannot, as a line prosecutor or as one agent in an agency, you know, fight and win. Our strength comes in collective action. And I think that starts with demanding that people who have responsibility and opportunity do the right thing now.
Not to flick back at journalists for a second, but as we're taping this, I just want to flag that our friend Harry Littman has just said, you know, I'm not writing for the LA Times anymore. In no way related to Kash Patel, but I think related to this larger issue of, you know, the sort of Tim Snyder, don't obey in advance, the formulation that says that at some point we all have to ask ourselves, have we crossed into doing harm or being complicit with harm? And I love the subtlety of your answer, which is there's no one answer. This is going to be case by case, person by person, but the depth of our commitment collectively to support that, I think, is the really important thing. That we can't stand around waiting for the Sally Yateses to pop out of a cake, right? Like, this is just going to have to be much bigger and broader than that.
I think that's right. And it's sort of like, you know, that do you stay on Twitter or do you go, right? I don't have much of a stomach for Twitter these days. On the other hand, there's a part of me that believes that you should never cede your voice in the public marketplace of ideas. And maybe you need to just commit to never reading your comments and ignoring the trolls just to go and speak truth to power in a forum like that, where people are going to see it. And some people, a small number of them, the truth will nag away at their inner cores, and maybe they'll come around over time. But at least you're not obeying in advance, right? You're not giving up and ceding the public marketplace of ideas to the anti-democratic forces. You're forcing them to live with you still in their marketplace. Maybe that's true, maybe that's not, but there's a big part of me that thinks that. By the same token, if all the good guys leave the Justice Department, then there's nobody at the table in the Attorney General's office saying, boss, We cannot do that. The law does not permit us to do that. DOJ policy doesn't permit us to do that. We need the good people, the career people with institutional knowledge to remain in the space for as long as they possibly can. I hate that for them. It's just so much to ask of people, but that is ultimately the commitment that you make when you take the oath of office.
Joyce, I want to say goodbye, but I feel like I have to ask one last news hooky question related to this, maybe not related to this, but the idea has increasingly been floated by John Dean. Jennifer Rubin just wrote about this. We're hearing more and more that Joe Biden should do some kind of massive blanket pardon for absolutely everybody, including Jack Smith's team, including the Mueller team. Just pardon, 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 and protect everyone. Do you have thoughts on that?
I do. I don't think I have a position yet, but I do have thoughts. I see the obvious attraction of the idea, but I have questions like, where does it end? If we do it now, then is this just what every president does from now on going forth? And can nobody be prosecuted anymore? Because presidents are pardoning like these big groups of people, like, nobody who was involved in this gambling scandal can be prosecuted or whatever, just based on their whims. And then there's also this notion that accepting a pardon implies that you are acknowledging that you did something wrong and that you were guilty. And I think that we will see some people who will not accept pardons, even if they're offered, and are willing to sort of face the dragons rather than say that what they did was wrong when they believe that what they did was right. So it's not a comprehensive, perfect solution. I mean, that's the real problem, right? The issue isn't so much pardons. The issue is, what is Donald Trump going to do to good people who were doing their jobs in an effort to punish them? And how are we as a country going to prepare for that? The pardon is a tool that might work for some people in some situations. It certainly got Hunter Biden out of hot water pretty quickly and comprehensively. I worry that we will focus too much on the issue of the pardon and not enough on the issue of the realities of this incoming presidency.
Joyce White Vance teaches law at the University of Alabama School of Law. She served as the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Alabama from 2009 to 2017. She is, in all of her free time, an MSNBC contributor, a member of the Sisters-in-Law podcast team, a Cafe Insider podcaster with Preet Bharara, and the author, I don't know how, of the Civil Discourse newsletter on Substack that I really urge all of you to subscribe to. Above all things, I think I want to say Joyce is brave, always. And in a podcast that really, I think, turns on this question of what bravery is going to look like, I really, really thank you, Joyce, for being there, on my text threads and in my email, reminding me what that looks like. So thank you so, so much for being with us today.
Well, look, to the extent that I have any bravery in me, it comes from my friends. And isn't that the insight that we all need to take away? I would not be brave without you in my life. So we all need to surround ourselves with the people who help us be brave.
Bravery, knitting, and chickens. Oh my. Thank you, Joyce.
Bye.
And that is all for this episode. Thank you so much for listening in. And thank you so much for your letters and your questions and your comments. And if you have a burning question for me or for Mark Stern, please email it to amicus@slate.com. We are putting together a kind of mailbag episode for the end of the year where we're going to try to answer your very smart questions. So please feel free to send that along to amicus@slate.com. We've really loved what you've sent so far. Coming up right after this episode is today's bonus episode of Amicus Plus. Mark Joseph Stern joins me in the Padded Cigar Bar to discuss the very huge trans healthcare case that was argued at the court this week and why the conservative justices came down with a sudden weird case of Anglophilia. You can subscribe to Slate Plus directly from the Amicus show page on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, or visit slate.com/Amicus Plus to get access wherever you listen. That episode is available for you to listen to right now, and we'll see you there. Sarah Birmingham is Amicus's senior producer. Our producer is Patrick Fort. Alicia Montgomery is vice president of audio at Slate. Susan Matthews is Slate's executive editor. And Ben Richmond is our senior director of operations. We'll be back with another episode of Amicus next week. And until then, hang on in there.